Alright, so I was in the process of making a tier list specifically dedicated to hex perks, and something caught my eye. There's two perks in particular, two of them that really stand out and are kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. Those two perks being two hex perks that do nothing right from the start. Well, I take that back. One of them does a little something right from the start, but they have to be powered up. They're a token-based hex system, 0 to 5 tokens. Both require 5 tokens to reach their full power, and yet one is so much stronger than the other, there's no reason to pick one of them. Those two perks being Hex Devour Hope, which obviously is considered to be one of the strongest perks in the game, as long as it doesn't get destroyed in the first 30 seconds, of course, because, you know, that's the problem with hex perks. They can not get any value at all. They can just get absolutely destroyed. And, of course, the only other token-based hex perk, you know, besides Thrill of the Hunt, but Thrill of the Hunt starts with 5 tokens, is Hex Huntress's Lullaby, which standing up against Devour Hope doesn't even come close to being nearly as impactful. So why is Devour Hope different? Why is it considered one of the strongest perks in the game, but yet Huntress's Lullaby is one of the weakest perks in the game and has less than a 1% pick rate? Well, Devour Hope at 1 token does absolutely nothing. But 2 tokens, you receive the following benefits. 10 seconds after hooking a survivor, you gain a 5% haste for the next 10 seconds. Then 3 tokens is where things really get interesting. After receiving 3 tokens, you receive the previous haste effect, and all survivors are exposed permanently, as long as the totem's still standing. And then at 4 tokens, nothing changes. That's basically like the intermediary token. It's like the oh shit token, you know what I mean? But at 5 tokens, you keep all the previous effects, so you get the haste boost after hooking a survivor. Everybody's exposed, but now you're granted the ability to kill all survivors by your own hand. Needless to say, that's a pretty strong perk, right? I mean, it makes sense why it's a hex perk. It's the kind of perk that can be insane if it gets value, but also it can be cleansed within the first 30 seconds of a game, and you essentially get nothing from it and leaving you with a 3 perk game. You know, that's how they balance the strong hex perks. It's high risk, high reward, and so you would kind of think that all hex perks would be worthy of being a hex perks, you know what I mean? Like, they'd all be crazy strong, they'd all be a problem, they'd all be at a certain level to where a survivor is kind of forced to get rid of them or suffer the consequences. But that's just not the case, because now we're looking at Hex Huntress's Lullaby. Alright, survivors failing a repair skill check instantly regress the generator by 6% in addition to the regular default penalty of 10%, which this is good. I think you can leave this how it is. That's 16% for every missed skill check. That's 1% higher than the old school pain res, the previous iteration right before it was nerfed, because pain res was 15% to the most progress gen. This is 16% to any gen. So, and it's not 16% of the total, it's 16% of the entire gen, not like 16% of how much progress you have on it. Survivors failing a healing skill check instantly regress 6% as well of the healing progression in addition to the default penalty. And then you get to your tokens. So that's at 0 tokens. So it's actually doing something at 0 tokens, which, you know, unlike Devour Hope, I guess is good. So the first token, the timer between the audible skill check warning cue and the skill check appearing is reduced by 14%. 2 tokens, 28%, 3 tokens, 42%, 4 tokens, 56%, and 5 tokens complete suppression of the audible warning cue. Now that may sound like a lot, that may sound strong, that may sound like it's doing a lot, and it's worthy of being a hex perk, and if survivors actually miss skill checks, it would totally be worth being a hex perk. I mean, like I said earlier, it's like a pain res hitting the gin every time. But when you have survivors who've been watching lines spin in a circle that they have to match up to hit a mark going on for 8 years straight now, I mean, you'll find out if you use Huntress's Lullaby that they don't miss that often, even with difficult skill checks. I mean, many survivors are hitting overcharge skill checks, brand new part skill checks, Merciless Storm. I've even seen survivors hitting Merciless Storm skills checks against a doctor, you know, going forward, backward, forward, backward, forward, backward, and it's honestly crazy. The only people this perk really crushes are noobs, and that's pretty much it. So I think this perk is really stuck between a rock and a hard place, because it's terrible for noobs, and it's like, it feels bad to go against as a noob, and it feels bad to use against good survivors, I guess. The first time I ever went against this perk, it was one of the first few games I ever played, like one of the first 10, and honestly, it was awful. I missed probably, no lie, like 20 skill checks on a Jin in the main house on Haddonfield in less than like 3 minutes. And strangely enough, the killer who was using it was a Huntress. And I don't know if they were going for Adept or maybe it was just a new Huntress, like a new killer. I mean, I was new at the time, so it was probably a new killer. At the time, I thought it was a crazy, overpowered, and broken perk. But now it's just like a joke. Anytime I see it on anyone other than Doctor, I just ignore it, really. But that being said, I still think this perk needs a buff, even though it's a noob killer. I think it would just incentivize noobs more to cleanse a hex totem. I really don't think, as it stands now, this perk is anywhere near worthy of being a hex perk. But here's the rework idea I got for it. Survivors failing a repair skill check instantly regress the generator by 6%, in addition to the regular penalty of 10%. Same goes for healing, so that's all the same. Okay, this is where the change comes in. First token. The timer between the audible skill check warning cue and the skill check appearing is reduced by 14%, and it reduces the size of the skill check success zone by 15%, and it increases the speed of the skill check rotation by 5%, and disables great skill checks entirely. So that's its first token. At its fifth token in its powered up state, full power state, the timer between the skill check warning cue and the skill check appearing is reduced by 70%, reduces the size of the skill check success zone by 75%, and increases the speed of the skill check rotation by 25%, disables great skill checks entirely. I put the skill check rotation speed at 5% because I think having a 75%, you still want survivors to be able to hit skill checks. You still want good survivors to be able to consistently hit the majority of the skill checks, maybe like 60%, because it is a hex perk, So you reduce the size by 70%, you reduce the skill check size by 75%, you reduce the warning queue by 70%, because I think a 0 audible warning queue at all is actually better than, a delayed one. And then skill check rotation speed by 25, because I mean, if you put that at like 50 or 75, I feel like it'd be damn near impossible to hit a skill check. After that little buff, I think that version of Hex Huntress's Lullaby would actually be worthy of being a hex perk, and killers other than Doctor would actually be able to get value out of the perk, even though he would still get the most value out of the perk. Honestly, I think Doctor's one of the reasons why the perk is still a hex perk alone, because in its current state, I think it could just be a regular perk, to be honest, but Doctor kind of prevents it from being a regular perk. It's always weird to me too. I've never been a big fan of the fact of killers releasing with perks that they can't use very well. Like, it's called Hex Huntress's Lullaby, but Huntress is probably the last killer you'd want to run that on. I feel like I kind of understand where they were going with the perk design for it, because she's a slower movement speed killer. So they're like, let's make a perk that makes it harder to hit skill checks, so people are missing skill checks more, so her being slower, she can keep up with the game, you know what I mean? And I really like the concept of the perk for that, but it just doesn't do what it's supposed to do. Like, if we change this perk to be what I have it as the reduced skill check, success zone, and the audio cue, and the rotation speed, this would actually be a really great perk for slower movement speed killers, because it would slow down the game in a way that it's not making the generator time just permanently longer like Pentimento. Like Pentimento, you light the first totem, it's 30% slower. So a survivor who's sitting on it's like, okay, well now I gotta sit on this gen for an extra 30 seconds. But if you buff Hex Huntress's Lullaby to where I have it, now they still have the potential to finish the gen in 80 seconds, but now there's a few chances where they have to use, skill, you know what I mean? When it comes to Pentimento, there's no skill involved, you just sit on the gen longer. But if you buff up Huntress's Lullaby, it requires more skill, it requires them to focus a little bit more, and it does wonders for, slower movement speed killers like Huntress and Trickster, to where they can actually have the opportunity for survivors to miss skill checks. And yeah, I think honestly, Huntress's Lullaby, if it was a better perk, would be the best perk for slower movement speed killers in the game. Because right now, the main problem with the perks in this game is the fact that the great killers and the high mobility killers use almost every perk exceptionally well, like way better than everyone else. And then the slower movement speed killers suffer because they can't make perks crazy to help out the slower movement speed killers because the faster movement speed killers can use them so damn well. So it's kind of like Pop Goes the Weasel. Like Pop Goes the Weasel can be used way better by Blight and Billy and Spirit and Demo and Dredge, and so they lowered it to what, 25% from the original 30 to 35%, and then it's like, well, now the slower movement speed killers aren't going to be able to use it as well. But let me know what you guys think of this perk. Do you think Huntress's Lullaby is fine where it's at? I'm going to do some testing with it actually and see how many how many skill checks get missed in like 10 games. So